Okay, so full disclosure here, I wasn't really expecting to be making a video about this. If I was, I probably would have been recording gameplay for my playthrough of the story I'm talking about. So instead, you'll just have to settle for random cringy boss fight gameplay that's probably especially cringy since I haven't really done a lot to optimize what team I send after the boss to what I want my playstyle to be, and I'm just rolling with the team I've been using for a hot minute for other encounters. Maybe I'll throw in some footage of me curb stomping floor 11 of Spiral Abyss with Ito or something, or just beetle fights. Who knows? You'll see it if it's there. But you read the title, and chances are you clicked on it solely because you actually know what Chapter 5, Act 5 means. But for those who don't, and probably just click the video because it by some miracle hit your subscription box, or somewhere else in the algorithmic internet stalker vortex that leads in my general direction, I'm talking about Genshin Impact's latest main story quest, otherwise known as the Archon Quest. And it's, fine. I think I'm going to do this kind of like a compliment sandwich. We'll start and end with some things that I really liked and jam all the negative stuff that tends to get people to actually pay attention right in the middle. Like some kind of preserve? Because I actually have a lot to talk about in terms of both good and bad. Yeah, the title isn't really all that clickbaity. No wonder I don't have 20 million subscribers. Jeez, get it together, fucking loser. Anyway, let's start with some good stuff, and some of that relates to one of my concerns with the boss fight before actually knowing how the play loop was going to run. Sure enough, in the actual story, we picked this moment to get the Pyro main character. We actually start at C6 with them, but also we have constellations we unlock with essentially Natlan reputation. While I would have preferred we just more straightforwardly had one set of constellations we were looking at on the character screen, it's really no big deal figuring out what this is once you interact with the system, and something I'm sure the viewers of the last video will call a double standard when they half listen to what I'm saying, actually interweaves the constellation progression of the main character's different elemental modes with the lore in a more interesting way than get all the oculi that nobody in the game ever fucking refers to as important, like with the other elements, or get it in the shop like in Honkai Star Rail. Believe it or not, this isn't the only time in this video Star Rail is going to come up. But like I said, this is the most fitting moment for Pyro Traveler to actually be playable. And when playing him outside of the boss fight a little bit, I did notice that there were a couple things that he didn't have outside of the boss fight. Either that or are unlocked through the aforementioned second constellation thing. Namely the Zelda sword beams that, well, truthfully didn't really do that much to make the boss fight easier, but it was still cool. By the way, there's a couple of other mechanics that maybe because I'm fighting the boss in a way that just doesn't give them a chance to come up, don't seem to even be in the weekly version at all, which has been done before. The flight combat sequence from Storm Terror doesn't come back either, thank God, but it's especially fitting that the press T to anime button was removed from the weekly fight here. And in the weekly version, it does feel like the void wards aren't all that bad. I say as my footage shows me not actually breaking them. But bear in mind that I'm using a team that I normally prefer for void-warded enemies when fighting the damn thing. But there was a time, the first time, where I was stupid and tried to switch out Toma for Traveler, not realizing how hard to dodge those damn ticks are to avoid when you're literally tethered to the thing, and thinking more Night Soul damage would be the way to go. And it did seem like breaking the void wards was a lot slower with Kanichi down. And Traveler actually does Night Soul damage, so what does that tell you? Well, the Pyro Traveler is not a very good main DPS, but besides that, I mean, point is, there's a possibility they did balance how taxing it is for non-Natlan characters, which means that the problem that exists is likely having the designs that use it keep in mind that the rest of the game exists too, which is a good thing. The visuals were very cool, everything like that. We did a good job of tying up loose ends in the story on the way to the boss fight as well. So now let's get to the bad. Because the tying up of loose ends also came with there being too much rope for that job. I brought up the way that Star Rail handles main character constellations before, and I think comparisons to Star Rail's story is really going to be a strong indicator of my feelings here. See, Star Rail stories are incredibly dialogue heavy. This is something I kind of realized and pointed out to friends when playing through The Finest Duel Under the Pristine Blue Part 1, which, to summarize, is the one where March 7th learns Kung Fu and the furries have a prison break. Star Rail has a lot of yapping in it. But boy is that yapping worth it. It's something I noticed in Penacony as well, especially near the end. The dialogue goes on for a country mile, but oftentimes that large amount of dialogue feels very weighty. We get concepts in the lore explained to us in a way that feels less expository than it did in Honkai Impact 3rd. We get dialogue that asks philosophical questions about what's going on in the story, most notably highlighted by Aventurine's motivations being dissected with the sharpest of scalpels, that's probably being held by Sunday, or Acheron's existentialism, or, Boot Hill being Boot Hill. There's a lot of words, but those words do a lot of things. Genshin's dialogue has never really quite had the depth that Star Rail's has. At least not to me, but that's not to say it was shallow. While Genshin's dialogue didn't really yap at you about philosophy very much, the philosophical underpinnings of what they were saying still felt very informed and important. And while there was still a bit of repetition issue, especially once Paimon needed to recap the plot point we just fucking heard, it also knew that there was a time when it needed to, quite frankly, shut the fuck up. This Archon Quest, though, does not know when to shut the fuck up. I think there's two big moments that exemplify the yapping problem this quest seems to have. One is something that feels very lifted from Honkai Star Rail, actually. There are times where it will pull you out of the scene and into a void of space where you're slowly walking in. Admittedly, most of the time in Star Rail, you have the ability to run, which is kind of a knock on Genshin's way of handling this, but that's not really the point right now. You get the dialogue, normally come back in the scene with cool new powers or some shit, stuff like that. The moment that stands out of this happening would be the Yarilo 6 battle against Cocolia, where we get Preservation Trailblazer. But we're getting new perspective of his existing motivations, and that's coming with new information about those motivations. Even the repetition of stuff that isn't very fresh in our mind, but we also have the option to just, run past it if we don't feel like we need more elaboration there. This Archon Quest, on the other hand, has Maoika going through scenes of her past. Again. For the third time in 5 acts? Really only the second time it was done in the exact same way, but the fact that we're doing it the exact same way at all should say a lot. And it amounts to everyone cheering Maoika and the Traveler on, and side tangent, we're apparently supposed to be on the verge of death during all this? Yeah, that weight wasn't really communicated very well at all to me either. I didn't realize it until later dialogue that implied the Traveler thought the Ode of Resurrection worked in spite of them losing initially. Hell, they did the incantation back in the stadium, and I just thought it was supposed to be a form of bland motivation. Yeah, I think the whole scene would have made a little more sense if we realized we were closer to death than the times the Traveler was actually selling physical pain on camera. Or having a giant naginata being swung at his face. I just don't feel the danger was communicated, especially considering how well it was communicated in prior story quests, VAs or not, because I know some people will try to blame it on that. But by one of the last scenes with Maoika, walking while her backstory gets repeated for the 5th time, I just found myself saying, oh my god, we fucking get it! But what is that thing that I'm thinking was over-communicated, really? Because it's not just Maoika's backstory. What is the, oh my god, we get it, really about? And I think it just comes down to the fact that Maoika's supposed to be, super cool. Like, the way the motorcycle comes in at the end. That was much more effective of a way to get across that cool factor. Just a quippy line, motorcycle shows up, they leave on the motorcycle. Very 90s, but there's a reason it worked then. Hell, the best writing was for Capitan near the end, and although part of that is because we got a slight dip into the existentialism that Star Rail likes using. It's also because it didn't beat us over the head with what kind of character that Capitan is. Now, I'm not saying that his motivations were never repeated, but a little repetition can go a long way. And each time things about what he wanted were brought up, there were details added that felt like they informed us more. The dream sequence with the spirits, and in the end we're told what that meant after letting that idea linger for a while. The curse of immortality being the catalyst for his whole thing, in spite of very rarely even being mentioned in the dialogue. It all adds up. Mawika's mystique, to be quite honest, was a lot more effective in prior acts of this Archon Quest as well, because we were getting bits and pieces of it sprinkled throughout. But Mawika's oversaturation here is really a symptom of the long-windedness, which I think is even better exemplified by the very end of Act 5. On top of having mini games about being a celebrity for no discernible reason other than giving an excuse for Mawika to sneak away to quote-unquote die, the worst part is right at the very end. We listen to an old man retelling to a bunch of children everything we just did. After having those events beaten over our head for the past 2 hours, this game has the balls to tell us about it again. And bear in mind, this is after Mawika has already eulogized Capitano, giving us another recap of the story so far, after every single scene gets an extended recap given for it. It's insulting. Okay, so admittedly, my compliment sandwich is a little messy right now because I put one of my bigger compliments right in the middle because I needed to in order to highlight how bad one of those bad elements I was talking about really is. But compliment sandwiches are stupid anyway, and really just ways for corporations to pretend they're making you feel good when they're telling you that you're a piece of shit. And I think I can say something else I really liked in all of this regardless. The dragging feeling didn't really sink in very much until we were entering the instance to start moving towards the boss, in all honesty. Like, even though you can say that the length before then contributed to that feeling, it wasn't really the fault of all that, because there were good reasons to be doing all that too. The sequence of helping the ghosts actually expanded on our understanding of how the Night Kingdom works, and also reinforces the stakes of the upcoming battle in a non-expository way. It also gives us subtle hints about Capitano's motivators. Sure, I could probably nitpick a couple of things about the baby Petlosaurus subplot's writing undermining itself. That's really not that big of a deal by comparison, and the result serves to expand on the weight of things. So that's why my overall opinion is that it's okay. I actually did thoroughly enjoy Natlan's story before now. Its commentary on the nature of war and depiction of warlike concepts being presented as competitive spirit, in addition to the overt disputes presented, added a lot to proceedings, and this was the first part of the Archon Quest that I really felt did have the problem of dragging on too long. I think a big part of the issue really does come with this story kind of trying to be Star Rail a little bit too much. Because a lot of the more obtuse elements did feel like things Star Rail would have done, but Star Rail has the context and the style of writing that really allows those to shine rather than get in the way. Is it unfair to compare the two, though? I mean, no, because they're made by the same fucking company. But let me know how much of a hater of Mawika, the guy who's probably using Mawika during some of the footage on screen, is in the comments below. Until next time, this is your friendly neighborhood Boonslayer, signing out.